Are you looking for a way to make co-parenting easier? Talking Parents can help you streamline your shared parenting responsibilities and minimize conflict by keeping all interactions organized and documented. With Talking Parents, you can stop worrying about the he said, she said, and focus on what matters most, your children. Download the app in the Apple or Google Play Store and start a 30-day free trial today.
Hey folks, we're back with another really powerful conversation today, talking with Julie Fast about when mental illness affects marriage, navigating divorce with bipolar and psychotic disorders. And so divorce, as we know, can be challenging in general, and it takes on this added layer of complexity when you have a partner who's managing serious mental health conditions. The unpredictable mood swings of bipolar coupled with potential episodes of psychosis, it creates an environment that's difficult to navigate, and you're going to be feeling overwhelmed. And today, we want to touch on some of the common struggles, certainly balancing compassion with the need for taking care of your personal safety, erratic behavior, distorted thinking. And Julie is quite an expert in this area. I'm really excited about this conversation. Before I introduce her, a little bit about Julie's background. She's a researcher and author who specializes in bipolar and psychotic disorders. She's our girl today. She's the author of Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder and Psychotic Disorders, Understanding and Helping Your Partner. It's the first book written specifically for partners of individuals with brain illnesses. You can read more about today's episode and about Julie in the show notes, but let's just invite her in. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here because you're highlighting a topic that we don't talk about enough, the partners. And I'm really happy to be here to answer questions, offer advice, and hear more about you and your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And before we dive in, I like to ask my guests to share something personal that has nothing to do with the work that they do.
Oh,
so what makes you, or tell us something unique or special about yourself?
Well, you mentioned researching, and I can honestly say there is nothing I love more in the world than researching and looking into systems and then sharing that information with people. I've been like that since I was a kid. And I remember finding notebooks from when I was a child where I'd look up the history of words and then what happened, or then I'd get into like a sport like hockey, or then I would get into learning about my favorite author or my favorite rock star. And I researched for years and years and years, and then I tend to write a book about it. So I can't think of anything I like better than research. That's my favorite thing. And interviews like this are part of research for me too, because I get to learn more about your work and the people that whom I haven't worked with and what's going on. But I just love research. I'm endlessly fascinated by information.
So there is an assessment called the Colby assessment, and it measures your fact finder. You're probably like a 9 or a 10.
I can never stop researching. I never get tired of it. I think that's how you're probably similar, because how can we work in such a difficult topic, brain illness and divorce and custody, and then we involve culture or maybe substance uses. We must be interested and be detectives and be interested in our topic. Otherwise we'll get overwhelmed. And I don't tend to get overwhelmed. I instead like to be fascinated. And I think that makes a big difference in doing this work. Not that I don't get upset sometimes and worried, I do, but I don't take it to bed with me at night. Let's say that. I'm not overly worried. I'm more fascinated.
Yeah, I think curiosity and wonder are, So excited about this conversation. The first thing I want to ask you is, so the audience that you're talking to are largely individuals who are married to difficult personalities. Can be anything from somebody who's just stubborn or has their own trauma and challenges to the entire span of mental health challenges that can show up. I was talking to one person, her soon-to-be ex was autistic. and all types of things in terms of
Mhm,
empathy and communication and
mhm.
reading somebody else's behavior. So we have this whole spread. And of course, in today's day and age, everybody's a narcissist, and narcissists are mean and evil. And we don't play that game here at Journey Beyond Divorce. And I love having experts like you come in to inform me and the listener so that we understand a little bit more what we're dealing with, and so that we have just such a robust toolbox to navigate, because divorce in and of itself with a perfectly reasonably healthy normal minded person is difficult, and then you add all of these other complexities. So can we just start by, you started offline talking to me about borderline versus bipolar
Right.
versus anxiety versus depression, and that it's actually not this whole pea soup, this vegetable soup, which is what
Not.
some people have said it is. So let's
Mhm.
start there. What is this?
I am so glad you used the word robust, because I actually have a workshop called Get the Diagnosis Right, How to Get a Robust Diagnosis for a Loved One. And in fact, in my book, Take Charge of Bipolar Disorder, there's a whole chapter on what is bipolar and what is not bipolar disorder. So let's look at the 4 categories of brain health, they're of brain health illnesses. Okay. So you have the most common are mood disorders, because so many people have depression. And a mood disorder only has 2 diagnoses in it. Now, within that, there's a spectrum: unipolar depression and bipolar disorder. That's the only diagnoses for mood disorders. Unipolar depression is a genetic depression where you have either a low or agitated mood for a certain long amount of time, and it's difficult to treat with medications, and it's independent of your life. So it's not trauma based. That's the definition of unipolar depression. You're depressed despite having good relationships, despite wanting to work, despite wanting to sleep. And then when you move into bipolar disorder, so you have bipolar, you have the depression, but it adds this unbelievably complex, interesting part of the brain that creates mania. So the only difference between unipolar depression and bipolar is the addition of mania. So what is mania? Mania is increased energy in everyday activities. It's not bizarre. So many people get confused about mania and psychosis. They're not the same thing. Increased sex drive, increased desire to gamble, increased creativity, increased irritation, increased desire to get things done, increase in activity, always with lack of sleep and not being tired. Bipolar disorder is a sleep disorder. So if you have mania, you will see an increase in everyday behaviors. They're not bizarre. So I want to become a model and go to Italy. You'll get on a plane and go to Italy and become a model. That's not a bizarre. It's weird that you would do it, especially if you leave your family to do it, but it's not bizarre. But you always, zero exceptions, will have less sleep without being tired. So if anybody thinks their loved one has bipolar disorder, the first thing you look at is their sleep. It's also a sleep disorder. So there's your mood disorders. Then we move into the next really big category, anxiety disorders. How many of us have anxiety? And once again, if it's a disorder, it's not trauma-based when we get to mood and anxiety. It's just not trauma-based.
You just
General
wake up, you could just wake up
You can wake
anxious.
up and be
Not,
anxious, and you're like, wait a minute, I want to take this trip. Why am I having a panic attack? So anxiety disorders involve, they can have panic attacks. You can have generalized anxiety. You can have phobias. You can have episodic anxiety. You can have social anxiety. So anxiety, just like depression and bipolar disorder, tend to be genetic. They run through families, and they are often independent of what's happening. So you'll have abnormal reactions to everyday events. You might get an award and be anxious about it and go, why am I getting the award? What have I done? OCD is also considered a part of anxiety. Then we move into the most fascinating to me. That's your psychotic disorders. And those can be generalized psychosis, just a basic psychosis. And a psychosis, by definition, is you have hallucinations and delusions. Hallucinations are where you see, hear, taste, smell, or feel on the skin something that's not there. Voice commands, get out of here, seeing rats run around a chair, hearing voices, thinking you stink, tasting something weird in your mouth, thinking you're eating monkey brains, those kind of things. Then we also have delusions. The most common is paranoia, or thinking you're a deity, or thinking you can control the world, or thinking that you will not be killed if you walk into traffic. And within psychotic disorders, you can have general psychosis, you can have schizophrenia, and what I have, a combination of a mood disorder and a psychotic disorder called schizoaffective disorder. Schizo means psychosis, affect means mood. So those first three are your genetic illnesses: depression, bipolar, the anxiety disorders, and the psychotic disorders. They tend to run in family. Can they happen independently, and can they be affected by trauma? Yes, but they are not considered created by trauma. They tend to respond well to medications, lifestyle changes, sleep regulation, and generally changing your life to accommodate them. Then we get to the ones where I bet a lot of your clients struggle. Not that you can't struggle with those. And those are your personality disorders. Bipolar is not about personality. Schizophrenia is not about personality. Anxiety and depression are not about personality. But you can have forms of personality disorders that have those symptoms. Personality disorders are considered fixed over time. So someone who has a personality disorder will be consistent in their behavior. Bipolar is not consistent. We're all over the place. Depression can come and go. Anxiety comes and go. Personality is fixed. And in many of these personality disorders, you can be born with them, but they are often trauma-based. So borderline personality disorder, for example, which is a pretty old diagnosis, comes from complex childhood trauma, such as being raised in a cult, being sexually abused when you are a child, being abandoned, lack of attachment, having physical abuse towards you, often turns into borderline. But you also have antisocial, which psychopath and sociopath tend to go into that term now. You can have histrionic, you can have the very, very common paranoia, that kind of thing in personality disorders. But I think what your audience wants to hear about probably is narcissism, which is actually quite rare. So within all of these diagnoses, would you believe that we can share symptoms? So people with bipolar can be narcissistic, but will only be narcissistic during a mood swing. People with OCD can be incredibly narcissistic because they're so focused on themselves and their own fears that they'll push you away. But when we are talking about your clients, we're going to ask, is there a sleep component? Was there trauma? Are the behaviors consistent over time? And how do I deal with what I'm seeing? So there's your 4 types that you're going to see. They can have similar symptoms, but they do not mix. So people with bipolar do not have narcissism. They have narcissistic tendencies during specific mood swings. So we have to decide, is it consistent over time? Is it related to our environment? And then finally, the one last thing, substances. The number one problem I see today is the increased use of THC in cannabis because it creates much worse bipolar disorder. It can create a psychotic disorder in people, believe it or not. It's that serious. And it can lead to narcissistic symptoms if you already sort of have a baseline of narcissism because it's a stimulating hallucinogenic. So there's, I call it Psych 4x4. I won't get into the meds, but in each one of those, there's specific meds and treatments that are used. So your clients will feed from one of those 4 categories.
I'm already blown away. You've just, in such an organized, succinct way, you've just kind of given us 4 buckets.
4 buckets, that's the weight. And we're going to dip from the well of those buckets, right? Of figuring out, wait a minute, what's going on here? Is that the bipolar bucket, the narcissism bucket? But we're not putting them all together. Like we were discussing earlier, what if someone gets a depression and anxiety, a borderline and a bipolar diagnosis? Well, I'll say get a different doctor because nobody would ever, you would never put those 4 together. It's just not how it works, right? And so we need to make sure we have healthcare professionals who also have the time to make the distinction between those 4 categories.
Yeah, which is probably a whole nother 5 shows in and of itself.
It's a big issue.
We're not going to touch that. So here's the challenge that I want to put forth for you, Julie. On the one hand, when I coach my clients and when I speak to my listeners, I'm always encouraging them to keep the focus on themselves because you have no control with the other person, right? And so that's what we've all done. We're a bunch of codependents who have like fallen into these marriages, and we've been trying to control the uncontrollable for years or decades. And yet at the same time, you're entering this foreign, complex world of divorce, and you're not negotiating with a healthy minded person.
Mhm.
My divorce was back 2002 to 2006. I was in the courts. I didn't know anything about disorders of any type. All I knew was this feels so insane. Why is it that we see things so differently? Why is it that I'm a good communicator, that he doesn't, that there's not this ability to communicate and negotiate? And so for our listeners today, from that vantage point of what is going on, what can I, should I do? How much do I need to understand? I would love for us to emerge from this session where the listener goes, okay, here are the key questions I want to keep in mind. Here are the key tips and strategies that really resonated with me that I could do. And so to take this really complex, and of course, I expect you to do this all within an hour, Julie, because you're
I can't do it within an hour. I cannot solve the problem, but I absolutely within this hour can tell people what to do because I've done it with so many people. Is it easy? No, but I can tell you, I can tell people what to do. Absolutely.
So let me just lob it over to you then. Where do we begin?
So the first thing, I'm just thinking about advice that I give my clients. First of all, don't go into mediation with a high conflict, difficult person. The courts love mediation, don't they? But I want you, as the person going through a divorce with a problem, I don't even like the word problem because many people who are listening to this have ill partners who can't see they're sick. So the lack of insight is profound in all four of those categories, with those buckets we talked about, right? And you're right. We are not here to change other people. We are here to tell people what we need, and they have a choice to meet our needs or not. But one thing I can tell you about the courts, they do not understand mental illness. I say brain illness. Lawyers very rarely really understand it, but you're the partner. You understand what you're doing. You
And
understand
let me ask you, can you just share, because this is a piece of your background, so that they understand, like, that coming out of your mouth is very different than coming out of somebody else's mouth. You have
Right.
experience and credentials. So can you just
Right.
share
So
that?
I am not a doctor, et cetera, but I'm considered because I have, I should also let people know, I have bipolar and a psychotic disorder. I have a head injury and an anxiety disorder. So I live with all of this. And I'm considered what's known as an expert by experience. So depending on the state, I don't like to do court work. I will not ever testify. I let my clients know this. I won't do it. So I am the person who prepares documentation for the lawyers. So I work directly with lawyers, and then I am very heavily focused on the judge. We do a lot of documentation for the judge. And believe it or not, every single case I've ever worked with, the judge reads our documentation.
And you're educating the judge about
Educating the judge. And we're not educating the judge in a way of saying this person's bad. They need, not at all. So we only focus on our own experiences and what we need and the safety of the child. So of course, our work together, Karen, is going to be different depending on where there's children. And of course, if we have custody involved versus assets and just getting out of a relationship where you're trying to protect your assets when someone's manic, for example, or psychotic or using, et cetera, right? So I got into this work by accident. I decided to become a coach in 2002 is when I started my work, and I started coaching in 2010. So I had about 2 years of coaching before cannabis really came in and changed everything in my world, in my bipolar world. And I started to realize the problem is, how do you synthesize, let's say 10 years or 5 years, into documentation that a lawyer can give to a judge so that a judge can make a realistic decision? And I'll give you a little piece of how I started to do this. I was working with a woman who was my manager, and she was quite an amazing woman, and she was in an abusive relationship. And she asked me to go to court and be a witness in a custody situation because I had been there when he had made threats against her, was chasing her in the car, et cetera. Karen, I watched that man get up on in the dock or whatever and lie, to the point that I started to doubt my own experience with my friend. He was so good. This is before I became a coach. This is many years ago. He was so good that I started to go, is she lying to me? Did he really do this? Did he where is this coming from? And I remember thinking, as I got out of there and sort of popped back into reality, that's what a lawyer and a judge is seeing. So when I did start coaching, I've never forgotten that experience. We have to counteract whatever the ill person is going to present, not to get them in trouble, but to let the judge or lawyer know what to expect when a person with narcissism, a person with mania or psychosis does talk and does put in documentation. So that's where my expertise comes in. I create the documentation based off of what my clients need, and I explain the behavior that can be expected. And that really impresses judges and lawyers because they're like, oh, she's not, or he's not making this up. I'm actually watching the other person fire accountants because they don't want to do financial disclosure. I'm watching them become their own lawyer, which is really common when you are psychotic. So that's my specialty, expert by expertise, because I have 20 years and I'm the top writer in the bipolar field, but I don't do court work. So I'm not forensic. I'm not a forensic psychologist.
Okay,
But
so that I wanted you to say that because I think
so
that,
people know I'm not.
Yeah, you bring. I've had a lot of people who come on and talk about personality disorders. I think that you bring so much credibility to the table, and I wanted the listener to hear that so that they can hear everything else that you say.
And I'm also open to change and learning. So when I work with lawyers or I am creating documentation for judges, I have templates that I use because, believe it or not, and Karen, I know you see this in your own work, you really don't see anything new after a while. After a while, you see patterns, and that's what we bring to the table as coaches, because we're not therapists and we're not doctors and we don't want to be. We are a coach. What documentation do you need? What is the plan here? If so-and-so says this, what do we do? For example, I had a client whose husband, ex, filed 42 motions. So I said, let's get a spreadsheet. You show me the motions of what he's saying, and I will come in with a reply on each motion. And we realized that every single motion was a fantasy on his part. It looked real when he put the motions in. The wife is not letting me see my child and go to a therapist and blah, blah, blah. And then we would look. And so when I say I create documentation, and you were asking, what's the plan? We start with an interview where I or whomever you're working with, you interview the client and you use your expertise of what am I looking at? So I'll be able to tell very quickly, yep, it's bipolar, it's schizophrenia, it's this, it's cannabis, whatever. And then, of course, we're working with healthcare professionals as well. They have to make the diagnosis. I don't do the diagnosis. And then we start to create that system I was talking about. What is the goal of this divorce? What is the goal that's going to help the children? And what information do both lawyers, because both lawyers are going to see it, any social worker involved, any court-appointed child evaluator, when they come in with their $40,000 plan, where they look at the whole family and do that child assessment, we give them documentation. And so start with documentation, no stories. He did this and he said this and nope. On this date, here's what I saw, here's what I experienced, here was the impact. Here's the system that I see. Here's what I need. Here's what to expect. Here's what I've tried and what hasn't worked, and here's what I'm asking of the court, and that's what we create together.
Wow, that sounds so powerful.
I'll tell you right now. I can guarantee you in my system that I teach that we will find some peace in the process. I can never say, I'll get you this or I'll get you that, because you know the courts, they want to give 50-50 custody. That's just how it is. You also know the courts, unless somebody is a danger to themselves or others actively, they are not going to stop and give the ex a mental health evaluation. So it's up to you to present a case. You need to see yourself as part of the team of, here is the impact of that behavior on myself and the children. I need help in negotiating that. Now, the next thing I will say too, if you do have a person who has been diagnosed and they're off their meds, etc., I also work in how to write custody agreements where medications and or drug tests and or treatment are required if the person wants to be alone with the children. So it's a degree of like, are we just talking about assets? Are we talking about kids? Or then are we talking about danger to kids if they're going to be alone with the person who can't see they're sick? So it's just a system. It's a system. We have to see it like a grid, and we fill our stuff in, and then we present it to the court clearly without, as you said, we can have compassion even if we're out of our minds with upset at how out of control the other person is being. We focus on ourselves and on the child, and we present information, and then it's up to the courts.
Wow. So let's step back from the court for a minute. I finally decided, I've been sitting on the fence. I finally decided I'm going to go for a divorce. And of
Yeah,
course, I'm
great.
scared to death. And I have my own diagnosis of my spouse because we've been together that long. How can we, and I'd love for you, you can't say it enough. So the 4 buckets again, how can the listener begin to use this information about these 4 buckets to create a strategy for moving forward?
Well, the first thing is we're never going to mention a diagnosis unless it's official. So one way I think the reason that my documentation is so successful is there are no accusations, there are no stories. We simply talk about what a person thinks, says, and does. We
No
operate
labels.
facts only. Facts only. So the person can't come back and say, I didn't say that, I didn't do that, or you're making that up. And if you are only documenting your observations and your experience with the person, then they're never the subject of the sentence. In my experience, having access to my partner's healthcare has been incredibly difficult. And for this reason, I was not aware that a medical marijuana card was produced. And thus, when the signs of diagnosed psychosis started, I did not have an outlet in order to talk to him about it. Versus, he got a medical marijuana card and didn't tell me, and now I can't do anything. I say to my clients, do not make this person the subject of your sentence. They are the object of your sentence, not the subject. So when we communicate with them, when we talk to them, it's our needs only. In order for me to move through this process, I am not comfortable with mediation because trying to do mediation just in the relationship alone has not worked for me. So for that reason, I ask that we do go forward with a court procedure. If we do decide to do mediation, please know I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. And if you, whomever is working, see this happen, we will have to stop mediation and move into the court procedure. So usually what will happen is the person who's ill always wants mediation because they think they can talk their way out of anything, right? So sometimes you have to let it happen. But do you see that the focus is on yourself, your observations, your needs for your relationship with the child? That's the language that the courts like. Versus, he's too sick. Right? We can't, it's not our job to tell the courts how sick our partner is. It is our job to tell the courts how that partner's behavior impacts our own health, our children's health, our finances, our sleep, our housing, and our safety. And that's how we stop this me, back and forth that happens.
Absolutely.
Do you know how hard it is to do that when you're upset?
Well,
or when he's calling or she's calling or they're calling and saying things and you're like, he did it again.
yeah, and so I just want to kind of put a pin in this for a second, and just for the listener, the 2 tips that Julie's given so far is that you keep it in the I. You talk about you talk about your experience, you talk about your concerns, you talk about your kids, you keep it in the I. And the second thing, which I love, is no fiction, no opinion.
Nope. And no minimizing either, and no minimizing either, because you might even start to feel sorry for your partner. You're like, oh, if the court hears that, he won't be able, or they won't be able to see their children. Well, too bad. But so no lying, no minimizing. It's your own experiences. It changes everything, Karen. It's mind-blowing how it changes the stress and the everything you're going through, the almost PTSD experience you can have of trying to counteract what that other person is saying. Here's what I say. I don't care what he says or she says or they say. So if you're working with me and I get to read what they're saying and doing, because they'll file so many motions, especially if they have narcissistic tendencies, we look at the motion and we simply go, okay, and we counteract it by our own experiences. Now, the courts are not always reasonable, are they? So please know, you're trying to come out of this experience the best way possible. I cannot tell you that the court's going to be reasonable, but they're more likely to be reasonable if they see you're not trying to attack that other person who's a bit out of control.
Yeah, and the other thing that you said earlier too is no labels. And so I think one of the first things is everyone who comes to me, and honestly, so many coaches in my space kind of get right into the narcissist, the mean narcissist, the
We don't
harmful
use that word.
narcissist, he's a covert narcissist, he's a, and my advice to my clients is tell your experience, put a label on it. Don't put a label on. Don't call it gaslighting. Say
Mhm,
what you're
mhm,
experiencing. Don't use
mhm.
all of this jargon. It
Yep,
actually
I don't use any
diminishes.
jargon, right?
Right. So guys, keep it in the eye. Fact, not fiction. No minimizing your
No
experience.
stories,
No
no stories.
label. No stories. No
Even if the story is
labeling.
true, I went over to his house and I could see that there were cigarettes everywhere. And when I was there were this and there were, my partner is unable to provide a safe environment for my children. That's good enough.
Hard stop.
Hard stop, right? But here's another thing. Diagnoses are not labels. So if there is a diagnosis, there is a history of schizophrenia and or schizoaffective bipolar in the family. He has an official bipolar diagnosis. Here are the symptoms that we're seeing. And in order for me to feel comfortable for them to be around the children, it is essential that a bipolar disorder management plan is in place that we both agree on. Never let the courts decide on management. Never let hospitals or the other person. You're going to decide what you need, right? But see that language? Labels are when we say, he's a narcissist, he's gaslighting me, she's doing this, they're doing that. Speak to the behavior. In the last month, I have received, and this is a true story, 421 emails from my ex demanding information regarding this divorce. As a full-time mother and somebody who works, I'm not able to answer or even view the 421 emails. May I ask the court that we start the app, because they have apps now, where we're communicating through the app only, and there is a limitation to how much communication happens. In the history of our relationship, this excess communication has been greatly problematic for me. And during these stressful times, I can't read everything he's sending me.
Oh my God,
Done,
I love you.
done, 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 done. Because I teach how to write. Well, for a long, and by the way, just so everybody knows, I am not taking clients. This is not right.
This
Karen,
is
you are
not a
going to do
pitch.
this, right? You're going to do this because, and I can be here as a resource. In fact, let's start working together because I do want to move more out of one-on-one coaching. And then you can send me questions and we can, what is this? What's happening, right? But when we find internal calmness and peace in their chaos, we create a space for language that judges, lawyers, social workers, guardianship, custody specialists. You're not going to, you might have some forensic psychology going on if the person committed a crime while ill, but it creates a space to be the calm one. Let them have their chaos and their problems and their psychotic behavior and their whatever, it might be narcissism, might be trauma. Let them go at it. And then you respond in a way of, I read this, I saw this motion, I did this, I understand about custody. Here's what I need. We use a lot of bulleted lists. We use short documentation. Doesn't always mean that the person's not going to get custody or that you're going to get what you want out of the divorce. I can give you an example. I had a great client. I just loved her and they had a lot of money. So maybe 4 or 5 buildings, etc. During mediation, because we knew mediation wouldn't work, I said, just sit back and let him talk. The mediator quit. Step 1. Number 2, he bought a large recreation vehicle. I won't name it because that's personal. During the divorce process, when they're supposed to be looking at assets, let him do it. Note it. When he says he wants to negotiate, note it. You already have, we had our plan in place. It took us 3 months. $1 million business sold, about 4 or 5 pieces of apartments, 2 children, luckily adults. It was the most amazing divorce because she was able to step back, even with great fear and worry of what was going to happen to him and her, and just follow this process because we can't guarantee the outcome of the court, but what you can do is feel good about what you've presented. It's the best you can do. Instead of, oh, I let him get to me, or I let her do this, or I got caught up in their chaos. You are the calm in their storm.
I was just speaking.
And I know you teach that too, because I've looked, you do high conflict strategy,
Yeah.
and we can't get involved, right, in their chaos.
And the piece of it, I would say that the number one biggest mistake I see people make is not taking the time to regulate their own emotions and
Hard
get
though.
centered and get clear. And
Mhm.
so they're a twirling dervish and their spouse is a twirling dervish, and except he or she may be a little bit more able to put on a show in front of the judge. And so then the partner of the difficult spouse looks like the difficult spouse and everything blows up.
And that's what the person often wants or doesn't even realize they're doing. So let's look at it this way. Let them have their show. There is a Czech saying, not my circus, not my monkeys.
I love that.
Not my circus, not my monkeys. But children are involved. This is your former sexual partner. This is the person you thought you were going to be with. Your emotions are going to be, how did it get here? What did I do wrong? How did it come to this? Am I safe? Who is that person? Wait for that. Just get through your divorce and your custody. Then you can examine, what the heck? How did that happen? How did they get so sick? How can we do this? But finding that calm it's just sort of the only thing. I have to teach this to my clients, especially my moms who have children who are very, very ill. We cannot depend on the external world calming us. It doesn't happen. And another thing to remember, and you and I talked about this before we went live, these illnesses respond to external stimuli. So you are talking about putting an ill person into a pressure cooker. Their symptoms are going to increase. So you have to match. As their symptoms go up, you have to go, I'm not getting involved. The reason we're getting a divorce is because of those symptoms going up. Let the court see the symptoms. Let the court.
And what's in the center of that, Julie, what's in the center of that shift, they go up, they get more frenetic, I get calmer, is the spouse's fear. And the fear.
Oh, there's so much fear. And yes. Well, tell me a bit. So when you speak to your clients, what's their biggest fear when going through a divorce and or involving custody with somebody who has a brain illness? What's their biggest fear?
I'll put it in two categories. One is a fear for the children. If I leave, then I can't protect the children while they're at the other parent. So that my men and women across the board, they know that parent is unhinged in their own way. That's at least if I stay, I'm there. And so there's that story. And then the other story is born out of a deep codependence. Like, I can handle it. He or she can't. I don't want to, like, I just got an email this morning. I don't want to crush them. I don't want to be cruel to them. I don't want to, like, as if you're not doing any of that. You're just advocating for you. But there's such this overwhelming, even if you're angry and you want the divorce, this tendency to want to caretake the unhealthy personality and the fear of crushing that person.
Literally exactly what I go through with my clients as well. So let's look at those two separately. Okay. We'll get to the children in a minute.
Your kids may not be the only ones taking tests this year. SoberLink is the #1 alcohol monitoring device on the market for parents who need to prove their sobriety. Here's how it works. Your co-parent will test at scheduled times each day. Built-in facial recognition confirms their identity. Tamper sensors flag any attempts to cheat. And results get sent instantly to your phone, so you know your kids are with a sober parent, whether it's during school nights or weekends away. Set your family up for success this school year. Visit soberlink.com/JBD to learn more and get $50 off your device. Divorce feels like an overwhelming perfect storm as you navigate pain, fear, and confusion while struggling with unfamiliar legal procedures and the pressure to make complex decisions that will impact the rest of your life. Our free Rapid Relief Call provides the clarity and confidence you're yearning for. Visit rapidreliefcall.com for support and guidance today. Are you looking for a way to make co-parenting easier? Talking Parents can help you streamline your shared parenting responsibilities and minimize conflict by keeping all interactions organized and documented. With Talking Parents, you can stop worrying about the he said, she said, and focus on what matters most, your children. Download the app in the Apple or Google Play Store and start a 30-day free trial today.
I am starting to believe that abusive relationships create addiction. We are addicted to helping the person who abuses us. I see this in mothers all of the time. A mom will get a horrific slew of texts from their psychotic child. F-U-B-I-T-C-H, get out of my life. I never loved you. You should be dead. And the mom has this capacity to take that in and go, oh, it's just illness, blah, 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 blah. But what they don't realize is that abuse is abuse. So when you are abused by somebody, I don't care if they're psychotic, I don't care if they're on drugs, it's still abuse, right? And what happens is you become, it's more than codependency and enabling. I'm starting to believe this. You become addicted to saving them, but you can't save them. So as they get more sick, you're in this addiction loop. I've got to save them. I got to save them. I got to save them. Even when you're divorcing them, even when you're telling a child, for example, you can't come to my house anymore. I have to get a restraining order. You still will answer the text and you still will look.
So exactly. It's like you go down the toilet with them.
You go down the toilet with them. I love that. So the first thing we have to do to help our clients is withdrawal from caretaking. I have had clients say to me, Karen, I feel like I'm dying. And that's because I've told them they can't send Chipotle to their child in jail until the child, actually, probably not jail because you can't get Chipotle in jail, but in a detention. The child is sending, if you don't do this, I'm going to do this. And the mom is worried about whether they're getting food. And I'm like, no, the child is abusing you. When we get the abuse calmed down, they get to have food from you. What? And I want to go, what the heck? Would you allow this from a stranger or a coworker or a partner? You're letting them abuse you like this. And then I had to step back and go, they're in this dance. Do you remember a long time ago, the book, The Dance of Anger? Do you remember that book? Fitz was a really popular book. It changed my life a lot. Then we had Melody Beatty and we got the codependency. And then I love the 4 agreements and all this. But we are not addressing the brain health enabling that partners and family members go through, because that person would not treat you as they do if they just got help. So there's always this hope. If they would just take their meds, if they would just stop the weed, if they would just go to a therapist, I'd see that real person I fell in love with. And you fall in love with that. And then when they get abusive, I need to remember that's the illness talking. No, you don't. Abuse is abuse. So how do we, in that second scenario, they won't survive without me, they'll be homeless without me, they'll die without me, they won't be able to see their kids, they might commit suicide, die by suicide. How do we break that addiction to the idea that you have anything to do with any of that? You realize you have nothing to do with any of that. That is their life, their illness, their choice. And then create a relationship where if you do want to help them, it's done without enabling, because you can still help the person you divorce. It's the parent of your children, for example, right? So what do you do with your clients to help them detox from caregiving? In fact, there's the name I should write, the caregiving detox.
Yeah.
The addiction of, I had it with a family member, and I remember going, if she's going to die, if I don't, and I went, well, then if she dies, I have to learn to live with that. I have to deal with that. And it's a 20-year process, 30-year process for some of us to detox from the idea that we can save somebody's life who's ill or who's using substances. We can't. And when we detox from that, it doesn't mean we abandon them. It means we're no longer in that terrible dance. So in my work, I call this either the bipolar conversation or the psychotic conversation. These are the circular conversations. Well, why won't you take your meds? Well, maybe you need meds. I don't need meds. What do you mean I need meds? You're the one with bipolar. Well, then if you loved me, and I'm like, no. So the second scenario, which is you can have compassion, but compassion comes when you stop enabling. That's real compassion.
I agree with you completely. I have 2 different clients that come to mind. One, we talked about this, and she had been with her partner for so long, and she had told him she wanted to leave, but there was so much enabling going on. And I think that you described it so well. When I'm enabling,
I'm getting something.
I'm doing it from a place of love.
And I'm also getting something, though. I'm getting something because I'm going into the belief maybe this will work this time.
Well, so I'm getting something because, of course, I want to save you, but I'm doing it from this place of love. And I said to this woman, when I was going through my divorce, I was in Al-Anon and I just love their sayings. I love their statements. They have so much. And one of the things I heard was when you pick someone up and carry them for as long and as far as you carry them, when you put them down, you're placing them in the same footprints that you picked them up. And so as a person who loves your spouse that or your child or whoever that you are stealing from them all of the time and all of the distance that you enable. And it's not, and I was just talking to another client about this, until you let her have her breakdown, she will never find her breakthrough because you are protecting her from the breakdown, so she's never getting to the breakthrough. And then you're shaking her and going, why won't you have a breakthrough?
But one thing that's important though here, really important, if we are talking about actual bipolar, schizoaffective, or schizophrenia, we can't just put them down because they could die, right? So we have to, that's when guardianship, commitment, crisis teams, and actually looking at them becoming a part of a system that's going to help them comes into place. So we're not actually removing ourselves from them. We are going to set up treatments that are available for them. And do you know how hard it is for people to do guardianship, Karen? Oh my God, they feel like they've taken away every single right. And I'll go, but your loved one might die. Oh, but they have the right to die, right? And so, yes, we're putting them down, but we don't have to put them down into nothingness. They're not only on their own. In other words, there's no rock bottom in brain illness. Doesn't exist. It's not like addiction. In addiction, you have to, Al-Anon is great. Al-Anon's a great program. In addiction alone, which is sort of rare actually, but in addiction alone, they do have to reach that. But in our world that you're working with, and we're talking today about the bipolar or the psychotic disorders or the truly ill people, you can't just put them down because they'll never stop what they're doing and they will come after you over and over and over again. So we have to put them down in treatment.
So you're saying that, and I'm going to push back because so many of my clients, their spouses are undiagnosed and they have the same narrative. I'm not the problem.
But their fear and their enabling. I'm saying if you are getting a divorce and you are that concerned about somebody and that worried about them, you still can divorce them and say, if you need treatment, I'll help you. If you want help on getting off those drugs, you are not abandoning them when you take care of yourself. But if you have children with that person, you do need this process. Do they actually need help from the state to get treatment? Are they so sick that, for example, I cannot have them alone with the children because they might be negligent? Not that they're going to harm them, but because you don't see, I'm not worried about somebody like a parent killing their children. That's not the situation. I'm far more worried about the child killing the parent than the parent killing the children in my world. We don't see a lot of parent killing children in the bipolar world, for example. So all I'm saying is that it's stopping enabling doesn't mean you stop having compassion or that you even stop offering help. You just no longer expect them to use the help or force the help on them. You're not walking away completely if you don't want to, but you're,
and I think that
you can walk away. If you have no children, oh goodness, walk away.
Yeah, right. So I think that it's getting really nuanced, which is great. And I think this is really important. So what I'm hearing you say is many of us, even when we're angry and what have you, we care about that human being. We brought children into the world with them. And what I hear you saying is you can care, you can be a stand for their health. You cannot control them. They have to participate. They have to be open and willing. And you don't have to turn your back. You don't have to be cruel. You don't have to be a cold, nasty person. But you do have to put your own safety and the safety of your children front and center and not turn your back, but not force it down their throat.
Or not give them the back to beat.
Or not give them the back to beat.
But here's something great. The number one way to get your partner into treatment is the courts. Without question.
And so tell me.
We put it in divorce documentation. We put it in documentation. So let's say, for example, that it's a custody situation. Okay.
Mhm.
And you have shown, let's say there is a diagnosis. If there's not a diagnosis, it's difficult. And like you said, it gets much more difficult. But let's just talk the basics. Let's say there is a diagnosis, and the reason that you're getting a divorce is the person will not get help, right? So it is your job to use documentation with your lawyer and show the court without treatment. Here's the behavior to expect from the parent. And I want this parent to be with their child. But there are years of research, and it's very clear that those who are in treatment are more able to be with their children. So we do a tiered system. I do lots of, the programs where you do the first 6 months and then they get a step to the 3 months, and then maybe they can be alone with the child. So we do these step down programs all the time. Number one, if you want to be alone with the child, here's what you have to do. If you want supervised visits, here's what you have to do. And if you don't want to be with the children, here's what you have to do. Now, we don't use that wording because every parent will say, I want to be with my children. So we do documentation. It's very clear that so-and-so wants to be a parent. And in order to be a parent, in light of the schizophrenia diagnosis, it's essential that the antipsychotic shot that has been prescribed is taken every 2 weeks as prescribed at this dosage. If anything changes, we go back to the custody agreement and we look to see if the change is in alignment with the treatment that is used for this illness. If we don't use that language, the person will get a bad doctor, or they'll try to get around things, or they'll say, I have too many side effects. Now, I'm not talking about forced medications. I don't like that word. These are medically necessary medications for somebody with serious illnesses. We put the language in the court.
So it's almost, I was just talking to someone about what's the difference between a regular settlement agreement and a parallel parenting one. It has so many more, it's just got a lot more teeth to it. It's much more rigid. And so what I'm hearing is when you approach, and you're obviously successful with this, so when you approach the court the way you're describing, you can then be negotiating a settlement that has this level of teeth in it, that has this kind of guardrail, so that you're not just walking away and going, okay, well, that was a ton of
what happened, right? And we prepare this before. So my clients and I prepare this before we go to the lawyer, because first of all, lawyers are very expensive, right? And lawyers don't want to do this documentation for you. Lawyers want to present it. So a lawyer doesn't want to learn about bipolar disorder and whether it's narcissism and whether it's schizophrenia. They want somebody like myself or whomever to come in and give, all it has to be real, right? Information. And then they look at it and they go, yes, this works. What about this? That's how I get guardianship, right? Is I do all of the documentation with my clients, and then we present it to the lawyer. The lawyer goes, this great. And usually they just take my documents and use them directly. And I don't care because I don't need my name on it. It's not about me anyway. We do this. But what if your clients work with you on documentation before it's presented to the lawyer? So the lawyer is not doing the documentation because they really don't want to. Their job is to get
wheelhouse.
That's not their wheelhouse. Their job is to get what the client wants. So often when I'm working with clients, there'll be 3 of us. So it'll be my client, the lawyer, and myself. And I will talk to the lawyer, like, legally, what can we do? What do we need to say? How do we do this? Especially, I had somebody who had many, many, many kids, including some children who were adopted. Absolutely wonderful person. So how do we keep it all in track? How do we deal with things? This is where we use a lot of spreadsheets, right? But we go in with a plan. We're not negotiating with the other person. We already have our plan. They can counteract and decide and say things. Their lawyer can come back. But if the plan is well done, there's not a thing the lawyer can say. It's really amazing.
Okay,
So
I love this. I had no idea.
Oh, I do. You wouldn't believe the documentation. Sometimes I can now, but it's hours and hours. That's why I don't do this work anymore. It's hours and hours and hours of me researching and listening, using my templates, interviewing them, and then writing it. And so now, as you and I talked about, how do we get this information to clients so that they have templates and documentation that they can use? And what info does the court want to see? And you have to understand the court. You have to understand the judge. What rulings does the judge often make? The other person's lawyer, almost always your lawyer will know the other person's lawyer. You're in the same town. Let's find out about them. Let's see what they want. If the person decides to be their own lawyer, which happens, what do we do there? How do we present documentation? Who's the judge's clerk? Because boy, that's your friend, right? Who is your lawyer's paralegal? How do we present this? When do we do this? What testimonials do we need from either police or CIT or healthcare professionals that doesn't get the other person in trouble, but that does document what we need? Are the children old enough to have interviews? What do they say? Because we don't want the children to be pawns here. All of this is done with my clients before we go to a lawyer.
So do you walk people through this in a group program or?
I will. So right now, it's interesting you say that. I'm just starting to offer this through groups and that kind of thing. But my goal is to do, and I'm sure you're probably doing something as well. We now, especially after COVID, are able to do so many more things digitally.
Yeah.
So if we can do sort of case histories, and then somebody can say, all right, here's Karen's program or Julie's program. How do I create? Because that's my specialty. You are much more, I can tell, you are much more of holding them in place with the emotions and the experience. I'm like, let's document this. I like documentation. I like documentation. I don't want to hear your story. I'm not a therapist. You can go to your therapist. You can go to Karen. You just tell me what you want. We're going to document this. That can be done by looking at templates and understanding do's and don'ts.
Are you creating an online course?
Yeah, I will eventually. I'll let you know, and maybe you and I can work together on it. I'll let you know. Right now, my first course that I'm working literally starts December 1st is how to get a loved one, a child into treatment. And it's a 3-month course. It's going to be a private course. And I've already, I've got the people I think who are going to do it. We are going to do enabling detox for the first week. And I sort of had this epiphany that if I cannot get these moms who are the greatest people in the world, and they're all ages, a lot of my clients are in their 70s, and the child isn't sick at 50.
And right? They need detox from the enabling.
They need a detox because they think their child's going to die. And I'm like, first of all, your child might die. All children might die. Are we going to accept that we don't save anybody's life? They might die, but we're not going to do anything to make it worse. We're not going to do anything to make this happen. And then we start really slowly, and your clients can do the same. Start with text communication. Start with what you're getting from that person and how you're responding. Put a buffer in between, like an app. Become a detective. Like you said, get curious. What is this person saying that I can use in order to get what I want? Be a little bit Machiavellian. They're not well, right? So when they're not well, if you don't get involved in their chaos, you're going to be the straight arrow, and the judge is going to go, oh, yeah.
I have a client who I want to have listened to this podcast as soon as it comes
out. And it's not easy.
Well,
it's not easy. Divorce is so stressful. But now you're telling them that they have to, and I'm not talking about taking the high road and the low road. I'm actually telling them you've got to find some calm in their chaos, which you couldn't do when you were in a relationship with them. So now I'm telling you to do it while you're getting divorced. Right?
Yeah, but what you're also saying is you're paying attention to it anyway. You're paying attention to it. You're complaining about it. You're yelling at them for it.
That's right. We're done with that, right?
Rather than still pay attention differently. What I hear you saying is become the witness, become the researcher or the observer. And that way you're still experiencing everything, but now you're going, what is he or she doing? And, oh, what was my reaction?
That's right.
How did that impact? Yeah.
And what does my lawyer, so let's say, for example, you're in a divorce and the person you're divorcing sends you a thinly veiled, slightly threatening email that literally raises everything up and your emotions go into your throat and you're like, I can't believe that bastard did that. Oh my God, that bitch. And I'm like, okay, have that reaction because that's your reaction. Right. And then you're going to get calculating. This is the reason I'm getting a divorce. I don't have to interact with that anymore.
Right.
That person just gave me a piece of evidence on why this divorce is needed. Become the detective. It takes time because you'll rise up each time and you'll rise up each time because that's our emotional, that's our amygdala. That's our emotional. I can't believe that. Especially if they start to go after your parenting or they start to attack you or they say you're the one who needs help or they threaten and they'll go, I'm going to make sure the court does a mental health evaluation on you.
Oh, completely.
And you're like, oh, not getting involved.
This is so good. And the truth is, it takes a long time to get through a high conflict divorce. And
it takes a long time.
You're already experiencing it. So all I think you're suggesting is experience it differently. Feel it. And then use it. Use it as the fuel to move this divorce and the settlement in the direction you want it. So you're not negating it, you're not experiencing it, you're
That's
just
right. It's happening.
you're benefiting from
Yep.
the experience by
Yep.
using it to create your documentation.
So let me ask you this, because I'm only used to my clients who know that their partner has bipolar or schizophrenia or schizoaffective, because that's why they find me. Let's say when your clients come to you, do they know what they want from the divorce? Or is that where you're guiding them into, what do you want? What do you want? Are they clear on what they want?
I think that yes and no. I think the people who aren't clear on what they want is more, they're kind of stuck in what they say is confusion, but it's actually just fear. So 90% of the time when someone comes to me and they're confused and they're not sure, it's just that we need to create a safe space so that they can actually get their spouse's voice out of their head so that they can be clear. So then when they know what they want, typically we're dealing with concern over the children, right?
Okay.
And then the other one is concern over the finances, which are the two pawns that somebody who has a mental health issue and
especially if we are looking at any kind of personality issue. So if you've got a list from them, I'll give you a little exercise. Take the list, and then you're going to ask your client, you know your partner that you're divorcing. I want you to tell me what their comeback is going to be for this request. I want this apartment. I want half of your retirement. You don't get half of my retirement. I want their language that they're going to say.
okay,
You're always asking too much and you're trying to get something from me, and here we go again, and I'm going to get a lawyer, and there is no way I'm giving you that. That's all language. So we take that language, and we're doing our system here. We've got this. And in your documentation that you give to your side, you've already prepared their response.
right.
You're not waiting for them. You're not waiting for them. So I want 50% custody. Well, they have a 1-bedroom apartment and we have 5 children. So let's be ready for, I want 50% custody because they have the right for that. Let's figure out our response to the I want 50% custody ahead of time. I like to plan ahead 3, 4, 5, 6 steps, because if a person does have bipolar, or they are truly narcissistic, or if they're a sociopath, you're in trouble, right? You're gonna have a hard time, and you probably don't get with people who, maybe you do. If you've got somebody who's really got antisocial, you need to get out of there, right? You need to get what you can and get out, because you're not going to negotiate with somebody who is there and is enjoying this divorce.
Oh, yeah. I've had a few of those, and those are
They
particularly
enjoy
heartbreaking.
it, and it is a
Yeah.
thrill for them. They don't care about the kids or the partner. It's a thrill to get one over on you, right? But most people are not like that. They're all over the place. They're sick. They might be just confused or anything like that, especially in my world. Have this foolproof plan for yourself. You can't, it's no foolproof for them, but they cannot surprise you anymore. So when they do make a video where they pull out a weapon and say, what happens to people who don't do what I want? And you get a video of that, and then they take it off, you are prepared for those kind of videos. You know one's coming, the threats are coming. That's why you're getting a divorce.
So at the root of what you're saying right now, Julie, is, one of the big things that I work with my clients on is just stepping into acceptance. I can't believe I can't believe she, and it's like,
how can you not believe it? It's why you're getting a divorce, of course.
And so so that surprised or that triggered really comes from, I am still in resistance to the way that this person thinks or acts.
That's a really good point. So I often say this is cognitive dissonance, right? How can we know something but not believe it? Isn't that fascinating?
Yes.
I know, as a person with an eating disorder, I know what happens if I have binge eating. I know it. I'm aware of it. But somehow I believe it'll be okay. Or I know if I use heroin, I know what will happen. I know it might have fentanyl in it, but this time it might be okay. So there is a dichotomy that everybody in these situations, these high conflict situations, go through. You can know something and be rational about it, but the emotions are so much stronger. They're so more primal. You know why you're getting divorced, but you're still shocked that the person is getting more sick. You know that the person's going to do this, but you're thinking, well, we have a mediator. They're going to calm down. No, they're not.
Well, they love the kids. They
They're
would
not,
never do
right?
that. Right.
But isn't it fascinating that we can know the right thing and do the wrong thing? It constantly amazes me how complex humans are and how emotional we are and how we have to train ourselves, just like you're teaching your clients. So you do, I'm looking at the words I wrote here about you, high conflict divorce coach and strategist. You are training your clients to, just like myself, I call it empathy training because we have to train the other person to have empathy. You are training your clients, as you said, to not be a container for their conflict. You're not a container for them anymore. You're Teflon. You expect it's going to bounce off. You're going to have an emotional reaction to it, but you're like, nope, done. That's why we're in the divorce process. And this might even take a couple months in a really high conflict one, because, so I can ask you this, and I know you know the answer. What happens when your client starts to calm down and change? What does the other person do? They don't calm down and change. What do?
Yeah, no, they project, they deflect, they go at it, and
Or
then
have a new tactic. You might see them using calmness, even though you know it's not real calmness, to go, oh, I hear you. I realize that I have to be more calm during this mediation. I guess that's what you want. You're going to be aware because they're going to do everything possible to get back in your door that you have closed.
absolutely,
You
absolutely.
don't, you
And
don't let them in.
when I first went through, got out of my divorce, I remember thinking 2 or 3 times, like, Karen, you let your guard down. And
Because
I'm
it's
like,
human and we're going to do it. We're going to open that door.
yeah.
We're going to
And
let
it's
our
like
guard.
you let your guard down, you shared something vulnerable, and he came back with like 2 guns and blew you away with it.
Because
And
you're human.
we're
You're,
human. And so
you're human. Yeah.
it's such an important thing. So I think that you have to come back. We have to talk more. I want to talk about the kids of these situations.
I would love, listen, you're helping people that I can't get to, right? I don't, there's only one of us, but you, especially with this podcast, and I will put this everywhere. You're going to have, I have very large private groups that's going, we'll put it on Instagram, etc. How do we not only help the person you're working with, but their children have a genetic predisposition of whatever you're divorcing? If you're divorcing someone with diagnosed untreated bipolar disorder, the chance of your child having it is 30%. And the chance of them having genetic latent bipolar disorder, in my opinion, is 100%.
You know, Julie, my listeners hear me say this all the time. One of my deep desires is to break the generational chain.
That's right. So by having what you say, you do high conflict divorce by removing the conflict from your client. Let them have the conflict. You're teaching the children what to do because you cannot tell a child what kind of relationship to have with a parent. That's their parent. You don't get to control that, right? So they have to have the skills to learn the truth or their own truth about this high conflict person. You can protect them when they're younger, but by the time they're 12, 13, 14, they want to be with that parent.
Okay.
They want to be with that parent, and you have
And
to
if
let
you're
them.
a chaotic twirling dervish, then what are
And
these
so
kids choosing between?
you can be the container as a parent for when the child come back and goes, Dad canceled. Mom said something that was upsetting, or we did this and I'm not comfortable in that environment, because you did not probe them for that. You did not train them to go be a spy.
And you
They
did
got to
not judge
see it.
their
You
other
did not
parent.
judge their other parent, because that will never work. But you have to learn to educate your child about the illnesses. You don't have to mention the parent. And then when the parent does get manic, or they do get psychotic, or they're still using weed, the child can go, oh, I need help. I know what that is. And
And
then
they'll come to you because
and
you're
they'll come to you for help. And I called this the end of bipolar. And my nephew's 22, was raised, I used him as a test tube. I got to be honest, he knows it. And he actually wrote a little section of my last book. How do we raise children to make their own decisions around ill parents? Because
No.
we cannot say your dad's crazy. That's not fair. The child will rebel. This is way before I knew I had bipolar psychosis. I got a job, don't ask me how, as a night manager, something I would never do again, for a home for children who had been removed from their parents. So there were social workers there, and I was there. I was very young and I was learning, etc. The children would climb out of their windows to go be with their abusive parents. I learned so much from this. They didn't want to be removed from their parents. They loved their negligent parents. They loved their alcoholic parents. They loved the parents who beat them. Right?
And I think that, God, there's so much I could say about this. So I have experienced, my children are in their mid to late 20s, and so they've had their own impacts from being born of me and their dad.
And their own relationship with him separate from your relationship.
And their own relationship. And my son, who lived on the West Coast, had told me he hadn't spoken to his dad in a number of years. And he said, I'm beginning to feel badly about that because I see the parts of dad that I like,
that I want
in me. And it feels really bad to act as if he's not here. So I was like, oh my God, what a beautiful awareness.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to do?
I love, there's a, what, how can I support you? And what do you decide?
And his response was, I'm going back to where he lives and I'd like to visit with him. And I was like, great. What do you need to do it safely?
I love.
And we had this beautiful conversation about boundaries. And he basically called his dad and he said, I want to see you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one rule. My one rule is you may not speak at all about my mother or my sister. If you do, I will get up and leave. Mm-hmm. If you don't, we can have a nice conversation. And then he told me afterwards, Dad lasted about 15, 20 minutes, but he did something beautiful. He stood up and he said, you have a choice. Mm-hmm. You can stop or I can leave and we could reschedule. And I was so
And what did the dad say?
He stopped.
It works.
Because he hadn't seen his son in so long.
It works. It works.
Now, I'm not saying there weren't 100 displeasing things since then.
But still, he stuck up for the women he loves.
He set a boundary that worked.
Kind to his father by not storming out. He said, this isn't working for me. We can meet my needs in the moment of we're not going to do that. And what this does, your son and you, I'm sure he learned from you, managed to use the system that I teach, which is it removes defensiveness in the other person when you say, here's my need, you can meet it or not. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm explaining what I need in order to stay. So no defensiveness comes up and goes, who's that little SHIT telling me what to do? Instead it is, oh, okay, that's my son. Don't have to do that. And remove defensiveness. Beautiful, absolutely. Beautiful story.
And I think that had I bashed dad and complained about dad and pointed out to the kids what was wrong with dad for all of those years, I would not be a safe person to have this conversation with. And I think it's so important for parents to realize, bite your tongue until it's utterly bloody. Do not speak to your children
about, you can never
about their parents.
In fact, legally, you know this, right? Legally, you're not allowed to. So if you are in a high conflict divorce and you cross that line and the other lawyer knows about it, it is, it's not contempt, but, and of course, I'm not remembering the name of it. You cannot badmouth the parent to the child. Legally, you cannot do it. And so interesting that the courts had to put that in there because of the influence of an angry parent on a child. And courts are the best way to get all this done. I'm a big believer in the courts in these situations, right? But I just love it that you were able to, and I'm not sure if I read this but we can be a container for good things, but we're not being a container for abuse and for enabling and all of this. But we can be there for our kids as we get older, but it's a lot of work on our part too. So your clients who are going through this divorce, they're going through a profound emotional change because they are saying, I'm not only leaving that abusive or ill situation, I'm no longer interacting with it. Wow. That's about as hard as anything that you can do, because then they're going to push your buttons even more, right? But that's quite remarkable.
And until you get healthy and whole and learn boundaries and learn the kind of communication we're talking about, you can't possibly pay it forward to your children. Mm-hmm. So we have to wrap up. We've been at this almost an hour and a half.
So good.
Thank you so much. You have a gift. I want you to mention the gift. I want you to tell everyone about the group if that's something that you're open to talking about. I definitely want to have you back.
Oh, I'd love it.
This has been great. So The floor is yours, Julie Fast.
So if you do have a loved one where you suspect bipolar disorder, here's what you look for. First of all, you will see the sleep changes, but it's genetic. So especially if you're younger, if you think your partner has bipolar disorder, there will be a mother, father, grandparent, aunt, uncle, brother, sister, or cousin who's probably diagnosed these days. It's unbelievably genetic, right? You might have a family who's ignoring that and denying it's happening, but it will be there. Like they were in the hospital for a while, they have a problem with alcohol, they can't hold a job, they've been married 3 times. So look at the genetic component. If you are in a situation where you have that and or there's a psychotic disorder such as schizoaffective or schizophrenia, and you're having problems with cannabis, that's really one of my big specialties. I have a group on Facebook called The Stable Bed. It's a private group. There's about 8,000 members. I answer every question, and it is based on people who use the ideas in my books. Take charge of bipolar disorder, loving someone with bipolar disorder, getting it done when you're depressed, and my health cards insight system. I teach insight through a program called the Health Cards. You are welcome to join me. So just come in and go on Facebook and find me, and then I'll let you in the group. And definitely let me know that you heard me here. That's the first thing to go. You can also go to juliefast.com and click on the partner. There is a partner page that gives all kind of articles. I have thousands. I've been in this since 2002. It's everywhere. Karen and I have been working in this field for a very long time. And we have a special offer. So there are 3 books available and truthfully, Karen, we can do Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder or Take Charge of Bipolar Disorder, either one. You can decide who it is, and you can decide how many people. The winners, I will send you the book. That's the contest today. If you are in a relationship with somebody who has a diagnosis of bipolar, I recommend getting Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder as your prize. But if you're unsure, but you think it is, I would suggest starting with Take Charge of Bipolar Disorder, because that was the first ever management book, and you sort of need that before you can use the strategies in having a partner or co-parent. So they work for both as a person. So either Loving or Take Charge. We would be very excited for you to enter into this and get a book.
Beautiful. And if you go to the show notes, you will see the link for applying for the free book, as well as the links for those of you who don't get those first 3 books, so that you can go and
I should say, I also answer all of my direct messages, and that's where I think you and I originally met, on Instagram. So at Julie Fast. And if you want to see my work with people who have bipolar and psychosis, my public Instagram page is
incredible.
And then if you're a family member listening to this because your loved one is going through this, I have a group on Facebook called The Stable Table, and that's for caregivers. And then healthcare professionals are able to join both groups.
Oh my God, so much. Julie, this has been one of my most
I can't believe how fast it went. It was so fun to talk about this. Yes, we're going to help a lot of people.
Yes, we are. So check out the show notes, check out Julie's Facebook groups if that's good for you. Definitely consider the books, apply for the free ones, and Julie will be having you back again.
I would really love that. Let's work together. I would really enjoy that.
Beautiful. And we'll be back again with another episode. So for today, you take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Journey Beyond Divorce podcast. I hope you found guidance and encouragement to help you along your journey. If you like my podcast, please take a minute to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. You can also visit us at jbddivorcesupport.com, where our team of coaches support both men and women through our one-on-one coaching, group programs, online courses, and free resources. Stay tuned for our next episode, and I'll talk to you soon.